Right now, in the age of infinite scrolling and, 15-second algorithmic dopamine hits,
Oh, absolutely.
where visual media practically spoon-feeds you every single detail in 4K resolution, an audience of modern people has collectively spent almost 17 million minutes staring at a static image on a screen.
It really is a completely staggering statistic.
It is. Just think about that for a second. Nearly 17 million minutes of human attention span, just this month alone, dedicated to listening to a man from the 1940s slowly run out of gas in the pitch dark. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
I mean, it completely defies every single piece of conventional wisdom we have about modern media consumption.
Right.
We're constantly told that if a piece of media doesn't hook you visually in the first, 3 seconds, the audience just swipes away. And yet, here we are.
Here we are. And I have to say, the setting for our conversation tonight, it just couldn't be more appropriate. I'm looking out the window of our studio here in Atchison, Kansas, and the Missouri River is just completely swallowed by this massive, bruising storm.
Yeah, the rain is really lashing the glass tonight.
It is. It feels incredibly isolated in this room. And honestly, being here, in the home of Benedictine College, surrounded by this really rich tradition of classic storytelling and the Catholic imagination, it feels like the perfect environment to unpack what's happening here.
I completely agree.
Because today we're exploring a piece of storytelling that doesn't just feature isolation. It actively weaponizes it against the listener.
Right, we're talking about Arch Oboler's classic radio play, Night Flight.
Yes.
And if we want to understand why this specific audio drama has become the most watched video on the Chesterton Radio YouTube channel, drawing over 620,000 channel views in a matter of weeks, which is just wild.
Mm-hmm.
We really have to look at the mechanics of fear.
We do. And if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, an old radio play from the 1940s, just some dusty archival relic, I really want you to erase that assumption entirely.
Oh, definitely.
This isn't some polite, creaky vintage broadcast. This is a living, breathing, and frankly, a deeply terrifying dramatic work.
It really is.
Our mission today is to figure out why. Why do we, with our smartphones and our hyperconnectivity, suddenly crave the absolute darkness of a 1940s cockpit?
Well, to get to the bottom of that, I think we have to start by looking at the architecture of the isolation Oboler builds.
Okay, set the scene for us.
We really need to look at the immediate physical and psychological stakes that he establishes right out of the gate, and more importantly, how he establishes them using absolutely nothing but sound.
I want to drop the listener straight into the environment because the tension, it doesn't build slowly at all. It's just instantly there.
Right, there's no warm-up.
Exactly. We open on an American aircraft carrier, a flat top somewhere in the South Pacific. The sun has just gone down, and the dialogue is incredibly terse.
Very military, very sharp.
Right. The commander is asking for word on a pilot, Lieutenant Edward Webster. No one saw him go down. They just know he got into a dogfight, down to 0, the fight spread, he hit the clouds, and they completely lost contact.
And notice how the environment itself is immediately framed as hostile. The commander specifically mutters about those infernal clouds.
Oh, yeah, he hates the weather.
Right, and in a visual medium, you just show a cloudy sky.
Mm.
But here, Oboler has the characters actively curse the weather. It tells the listener that the sky isn't just a backdrop, it's an active antagonist. It's a physical barrier to connection.
And the ship can't just drop anchor and wait for him either.
No, not at all. There are brutal strategic realities at play. They're hunting a Japanese task force.
Mm-hmm.
The carrier itself is in massive danger just by remaining stationary.
And then, out of nowhere, the radio crackles. They get him.
They do.
Webster comes in over the comms, and the relief in the room is palpable. You can literally hear the officers exhale. But it lasts, maybe 5 seconds?
Barely that.
The commander asks Webster if he can see them. Webster replies, "No, sir, I can't. He is completely blind in the dark."
Yeah.
And then he drops the real hammer. His instrument board is entirely shot away. He can't even give them an approximate position.
And this is a masterclass in establishing pure physical vulnerability. I mean, I want to break down exactly what that means for a pilot in that era, because it's not just an inconvenience.
No, it's a death sentence almost.
Right. In World War II aviation, if you're flying at night, you have absolutely no visual horizon. Your brain literally cannot distinguish between the black sky and the black ocean.
Wow.
Without your instrument panel, your altimeter, your artificial horizon, your compass, you undergo a phenomenon called spatial disorientation. You literally don't know up from down.
That is deeply unsettling.
Pilots in that situation have been known to fly straight into the ocean, fully believing they were climbing. simply because their inner ear lies to them.
So he's essentially floating in an inkwell, relying purely on the physical feeling of gravity, which his brain is probably misinterpreting anyway.
Exactly.
The commander tells him they can't give him a bearing. And the reason is just chilling. He just says, Tojo.
Yeah, the enemy task force.
Right. The enemy task force is too close. If the carrier sends out a directional signal to guide Webster home, they act as a beacon for the enemy. It's a cold, brutal calculation.
It's the needs of the thousands on the ship outweighing the life of one pilot.
And then Oboler introduces the ticking clock.
Right, the mechanism that turns this from a bad situation into an inevitable tragedy.
The commander asks about his gas supply, and Webster calmly replies that he's on the auxiliary tank. He has about 20 minutes left.
20 minutes, that's it. That is the entire remaining lifespan of this human being, unless a miracle occurs.
And he's circling in zero visibility.
But the truly devastating moment, the moment that I think shifts this from a standard war story into a piece of profound psychological horror, is the final communication.
It really is.
The carrier receives orders from the flagship admiral. They have to move, and they must observe absolute radio silence.
Captain Gorham gets on the mic, and I have to say, the voice acting here is incredible. You can hear the awful, crushing weight of leadership in his delivery.
You really can. It's heartbreaking. He tells Webster about the enemy task force. He says, "My orders are to cease radio transmission at once."
And Webster, out there alone in the black, he receives the message. He knows exactly what it means. It's a death sentence.
Yeah, he just asks for his approximate position relative to a friendly airfield.
The captain tells him he should be roughly 463 miles northwest of Henderson Field. Now, I'm no mathematician, but 20 minutes of gas in a 1940s fighter plane, well, that might get him 100 miles if he's lucky.
If he's very lucky.
He's mathematically dead. The captain knows it. Webster knows it. The listener knows it.
And how does Webster respond? He doesn't panic. He just says, "Thank you, sir. I am stopping transmission now. Good luck to all of you."
The professionalism of it just hurts.
It does. And the captain replies, "Thank you, Ed. Good luck." And then, well, the connection is severed.
The line just goes dead. That transition is so abrupt it actually makes your stomach drop. It goes from this fragile thread of human connection to absolute unyielding silence.
It's terrifying.
I want you to imagine this for a second if you're listening right now. Think about being on a road trip. You're driving deep in the mountains, or maybe you're in a completely unfamiliar, sprawling city at 2 in the morning.
Right, we've all been there.
And you're relying entirely on your phone's GPS. You're just blindly following that little glowing blue dot on the screen. And suddenly you look down and it says, no signal. The map goes totally blank.
That spike of panic is biological.
It is. You realize how completely dependent you were on an invisible tether to the rest of humanity. Now, take that exact feeling, strip away the car, strip away the solid ground beneath your tires.
Yeah.
Replace it with the endless, freezing expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Put yourself in a damaged machine that is actively bleeding fuel. That loss of signal isn't just an inconvenience. It's the removal of your last link to the world of the living.
And what's fascinating from a production standpoint is how the audio medium weaponizes that specific moment of silence.
What do you mean?
Well, if you were watching a movie, the camera would pull back. You'd see the vastness of the ocean. You'd see the tiny plane. The camera provides an objective reality.
Right. It gives you context.
Yeah, actually, it gives your eyes something to anchor onto. But in radio drama, you are trapped inside the auditory perspective of the pilot. The listener has to mentally construct the cockpit, the darkness, the isolation through sound alone. Therefore, the confinement feels absolute.
Wait, I want to pause on that because the word silence is almost misleading here. It's not actually quiet.
No, not at all.
We only hear what Webster hears, and what he hears is the relentless, deafening drone of that fighter plane's engine. That sound never stops. Once the radio cuts out, that mechanical grinding just burrows into your skull.
That's a crucial point about Foley design, the art of sound effects.
Yeah, how did they even do that back then?
Well, Foley artists in the 1940s didn't have digital sound banks. They had to create these acoustic environments practically. That engine sound was likely created using a combination of electric motors, leather straps hitting canvas, and recorded loops manipulated on turntables to create a low, vibrating hum.
Wait, leather straps hitting canvas, that's ingenious.
Isn't it? And they intentionally mix it so it's obtrusive. It's not just background noise, it's the heartbeat of his impending doom. So the silence we talk about isn't an absence of noise. It's the absence of humanity.
That's a great way to put it.
The mechanical static, the engine, they become a crushing physical weight.
I was looking at the background of the guy who wrote and directed this, Oboler, and it makes zero sense to me.
Why is that?
Well, I assumed a guy crafting this level of psychological torture must have been some avant-garde theater prodigy, but he started out writing generic soap operas.
Oh, yeah, you really did.
He wrote these cheap, syndicated melodramas, what they called pot boilers. How does a guy churning out daily soap scripts suddenly invent modern, weaponized psychological horror?
It's a great question. And to understand Oboler, you really have to understand the landscape of early 1930s radio. A potboiler, by the way, was just a slang term for a piece of writing done quickly to boil the pot, to pay the bill.
Just grinding out content.
Exactly. The radio networks back then were heavily commercialized. They were dominated by light comedy, variety hours, and very rigid, predictable dramas designed strictly to sell soap and tobacco.
Right.
But Oboler, who grew up poor in Chicago to immigrant parents but was incredibly well-read, he looked at this massive, miraculous technology of radio and thought it was being entirely wasted.
He had a massive rebellious streak, didn't he?
Oh, hugely.
I read that in 1933, he wrote a spec script that actively made fun of American tobacco commercials.
Yes.
At the time, mocking a sponsor was like committing career suicide. It was the ultimate taboo. But it kind of set the stage for his whole ethos, right? Clashing with executives and pushing the boundaries of what the medium was allowed to do.
Exactly. And his real breakthrough, the laboratory, where he could actually test his theories about how sound affects the human brain, came in 1936.
What happened then?
He took over a late-night horror program called Lights Out.
I assumed Lights Out was just another network show pushing some product, but looking at the notes, it aired at midnight and initially had absolutely no sponsor.
None.
Why would a network give up ad revenue for a midnight slot?
Because midnight was considered dead air. Nobody thought you could monetize a broadcast when most of America was asleep.
That makes sense.
But for Oboler, no sponsor meant no corporate executives reviewing his scripts to make sure they were brand safe. It meant total creative freedom.
So he could do whatever he wanted.
Precisely. He realized that a midnight audience, listening in the dark, was primed for a completely different kind of storytelling. He could experiment with stream of consciousness techniques and a level of visceral terror that daytime radio just wouldn't touch.
And he didn't pull any punches either. I mean, his very first play for the series was called Burial Services, and it ended with a young girl being buried alive with absolutely zero hope of rescue.
It traumatized people.
It did. The network got flooded with letters of protest from terrified listeners.
He did have to pivot slightly away from that kind of hyper-realistic, inescapable terror and lean more into the fantastic. But the core mechanism of psychological manipulation stayed exactly the same.
Right.
This is when he started innovating with sound design in ways that literally changed the industry. We have to talk about Chicken Heart.
Oh man, Chicken Heart, if you look at the premise on paper, it sounds ridiculous.
That sounds like a bad joke.
It does. A tiny chicken heart is kept alive in a petri dish by a scientist. It mutates and it starts growing until it consumes the entire Earth. It sounds like a bad B movie. But it wasn't the plot that paralyzed the audience, was it? It was the sound engineering.
Let's talk about the how of that. How do you make a chicken heart scary on the radio? Oboler didn't use spooky music or screams. He used the continuous escalating sound of a beating heart.
It's just a constant thud.
Yeah. Foley artists likely used a padded drum or a heavy rubber ball squeezed near a ribbon microphone. And they just slowly, methodically increase the volume and the tempo over the course of the broadcast.
Wow.
Because it's a rhythmic biological sound, the listener's own heartbeat unconsciously tries to sync with it. It induces actual physiological anxiety.
That is wild.
Stephen King specifically highlighted it in his book Danse Macabre as a flawless example of auditory horror. Bill Cosby built a famous comedy routine around how much that specific broadcast terrified him as a child. The sound itself bypassed the intellect and attacked the nervous system.
Hold on. I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of this because it contrasts so perfectly with visual media.
Okay.
When a modern horror movie shows us the monster, a guy with a machete or a CGI demon, it answers our brain's primary question. It says, here is the threat, look at it.
Right, you might be scared, but you're informed.
Exactly. But Oboler seems to realize that the most terrifying thing in the world is the unanswered question. It's the threat you cannot see, which forces your brain to generate its own custom-made nightmare.
That is the essence of his philosophy. Consider another famous adaptation he did, Dalton Trumbo's novel, Johnny Got His Gun.
Oh, that's a heavy one.
Very. The protagonist is a World War I soldier who survives an artillery blast, but loses his arms, his legs, his eyes, his ears, and his mouth. He is a consciousness trapped in a ruined body. How on earth do you portray absolute sensory deprivation on the radio?
Yeah, I mean, you can't just have silence for 30 minutes.
Right. So Oboler used the eerie rhythmic vibration of rusty bed springs. Whenever a nurse or a doctor entered the hospital room, the soldier couldn't hear them or see them, but he could feel the vibrations of their footsteps translating through the floor and into his bed.
That is so incredibly bleak.
By focusing the microphone incredibly close to a vibrating coil of metal, Oboler created an acoustic texture that felt suffocatingly intimate.
So the listener only has access to the exact same limited, terrifying sensory input as the amputee.
Exactly.
That is brilliant. If we compare Oboler to the other giants of radio's golden age, it really highlights his specific genius. You had Orson Welles, who used radio for massive theatrical spectacle like War of the Worlds, simulating a news broadcast to create mass panic.
Sure.
You had Norman Corwin, who wrote these soaring, poetic, civic-minded broadcasts that brought the country together. But Oboler understood human vulnerability. He knew that by stripping away the visual, the listener doesn't just passively consume the story, they become a co-creator. You have to supply the darkness yourself.
And we shouldn't forget that he had a profound moral agenda, too. He wasn't just a shock jock.
Right.
He was fiercely anti-fascist. In the late 1930s, the American networks demanded strict neutrality regarding Nazi Germany. They didn't want to offend international markets or isolationist listeners.
Of course.
But Oboler was constantly smuggling anti-fascist themes into his horror scripts. He eventually grew frustrated with just writing about monsters because, in his own words, he wanted to use his airtime to confront the actual horror of a world facing, with half-shut eyes, the fascistic Frankenstein's monster moving over Europe.
Which brings us directly back into the cockpit of Night Flight, because this play isn't about a monster. It's about a man's mind fracturing under the pressure of a world at war.
Yes, exactly.
Let's dig into the narrative structure of how Oboler actually executes this, because his use of stream of consciousness is just wild. So the radio has just gone dead. Webster is entirely alone. The drone of the engine is filling the listener's ears. He knows he has 463 miles to go, and maybe enough gas for a fifth of that.
And we hear the psychological breakdown begin immediately. It starts logically. He begins to calculate his odds out loud. He says, 100 from 463 leaves? No, got to get up high. That's it. High, high, high. He's trying to maintain operational control.
But then his brain snags on a single word. He reflects on his last words to Captain Gorham. The captain had said, "Good luck." And Webster's internal monologue seizes on that word. He mutters, "Good luck." What did I say that for? Luck! 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 Why am I thinking that? Luck, luck, luck.
It's obsessive.
The repetition of the word isn't just dialogue, it's a psychological trigger.
It acts as an auditory dissolve. Think about how a movie handles a flashback. The screen gets wavy, or the colors change, or there's a slow crossfade. In audio, you don't have that.
Right.
Oboler uses the repetition of a word to signal that the character's consciousness is slipping a gear. The sound of the engine remains constant in the background, anchoring us in the present physical danger. But Webster's mind frantically retreats into memory to escape the unbearable reality of his impending death. The word luck transports him to a completely mundane, trivial moment before the war.
He flashes back to a poker game with his squadron mates. We suddenly hear the casual, easygoing banter of young men. They're arguing over a hand. Eddie asks how much he made on the hand, gross or net. And one of the players says, "Well, gross, I made $18.75. But net, after Terry's $5 loan and $3.60 of IOUs, I made a net profit of $10.
The specificity of those numbers is so deliberate. $18.75. $3.60. It creates a brilliant, agonizing contrast.
How so?
In his present reality in the cockpit, Webster is dealing with the massive existential mathematics of life and death, 463 miles, 20 minutes of fuel. But in his memory, his biggest concern was calculating a $10 net profit in a card game. It highlights the absurd fragility of life.
Wow, that is such a sharp observation. And the memory doesn't just neatly end either. Someone at the poker table bets 2-1 they won't see any combat action for 7 days. And immediately that idyllic memory is shattered by the blaring sound of a klaxon alarm. Pilots to battle stations. Pilots to battle stations.
Yeah, reality intrudes.
Someone yells over the din, "Hey, Ed, you win the bet. What luck?"
And boom! The memory collapses back into the terrifying present. The klaxon fades, and we're back to the deafening drone of the failing engine. Webster tells himself, "Stop thinking about it."
It's so jarring.
This stream of consciousness technique isn't just Oboler showing off as a writer. It's an incredibly accurate portrayal of a defensive mechanism in the human brain. When faced with imminent, unavoidable destruction, the mind frantically searches its own archives for anything else to focus on. It refuses to look at the cliff edge.
But what's so masterfully done is that the present reality keeps invading those safe memories. The most chilling example of this is the Ferris wheel sequence.
Oh, that scene is unforgettable.
Webster is trying to stretch his glide path. He knows his only tactical chance is to climb as high as his engine will take him before the fuel cuts out entirely so he can glide as far as possible in the dark. He's literally coaching the airplane, whispering to it, a little higher, rest of the way will all be downhill, so let's get high.
And that concept of height, of ascending, triggers the next memory.
Suddenly, out of the engine noise, we hear the voice of a carnival barker. Step up, ladies and gentlemen, and ride them high. Ride them high! Higher, higher, third wheel this side of the Mississippi.
It's so surreal.
Webster is on a date with a woman named Linda. They're getting onto a Ferris wheel. The barker tells them, have fun and don't stand up. And Webster jokes, not a chance. It sounds so innocent.
The brilliance here relies entirely on the psychological association. The carnival barker yelling higher, higher, ride them high starts out as a fun, nostalgic memory of a summer date. But as the memory progresses, the tone subtly shifts. The barker's voice begins to bleed into the present moment.
Yeah, it gets really unsettling.
The instruction to ride them high morphs into Webster's own desperate internal command to his failing aircraft.
And the conversation he's having with Linda is so grounding. She's confused why a cultured guy like him brought her to a cheap carnival. She jokes about an article in Vogue magazine that featured him as this promising young composer of nocturnes, riding a Ferris wheel like a kid.
Right. But then the tone shifts violently. Webster reveals that he is enlisted in the Navy. He's going to be a combat flyer. Linda is absolutely shocked. He says, but we're not at war. She tells him he's a fool, a sentimental fool. You certainly, of all people, have nothing to do with anything but your music.
And while she is making this entirely serious, impassioned argument about his future, the carnival barker keeps chanting in the background, higher, higher, ride it higher.
It's awful.
It takes on this horrific, mocking quality. The barker literally says, the Ferris wheel of the ages, higher, higher. It transforms from a carnival ride into a metaphor for the inescapable wheel of fate that Webster is now strapped to. He is circling endlessly in the dark sky at the top of the wheel, just waiting for the inevitable fatal drop.
It is incredibly suffocating to listen to. And I have to say, listening to this play today, the pacing feels so remarkably contemporary.
It really does. I think a lot of people expect old radio to be this slow, dusty, overly enunciated melodrama with actors using that stiff transatlantic accent, that theatrical way of speaking that nobody actually used in real life.
Oh, absolutely.
But this isn't that. The blurring of past trauma, casual banter, and immediate present tense danger feels exactly like a modern psychological thriller. It feels like the narrative structure of a Christopher Nolan film.
This actually brings up a vital point about how we consume media today and why I think a massive part of why this specific play is generating 16.9 million minutes of watch time right now comes down to hardware.
Hardware.
Specifically the hardware we use to listen. Most people listening to YouTube audio or deep dives like this are wearing headphones or earbuds.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the physical delivery system.
It changes everything. In the 1940s, a family would sit around a large wooden cabinet radio in the living room. The sound filled the physical space of the room. It was a communal experience.
Right.
But today, with earbuds, the sound is literally injected directly into your ear canal. It operates through bone conduction. When you listen to Night Flight this way, Oboler's stream of consciousness technique creates an inescapable closed loop. The engine drone is vibrating right inside your head. The pilot's unraveling internal monologue isn't filling a room, it's whispering directly into your own brain.
It's almost like an ASMR experience, but engineered for anxiety instead of relaxation.
Yes, exactly.
The intimacy is almost unbearable. It makes the psychological realism deeply uncomfortable, but you literally can't look away, or rather, you don't want to take the headphones off.
Because you are in the cockpit with him.
Yeah.
You are feeling the panic rise in his chest. And as the panic rises, the memories have to dig deeper to find meaning. Oboler moves us from the physical unraveling of the pilot to the deep, philosophical bedrock of his life.
Yeah.
When a man is facing the absolute dark, with 10 minutes of fuel left, what does he genuinely believe he was fighting for? Did he throw his life away for nothing?
And this brings us to the core conflict of the play, which I think is fascinating because it's largely an ideological conflict fought entirely within his memories. We learn that Webster wasn't a career military guy. He wasn't some adrenaline junkie thrill seeker. He was a classically trained pianist, a composer.
And not just a composer, but a very specific kind of artist. There's a flashback to a conversation with his mentor, Professor Bergman. The professor acknowledges his talent, saying he has full ability, but he brutally classifies Webster as a moonbeam composer.
I love that phrase, a moonbeam composer.
It's a devastating critique, really. The professor tells him that he writes lovely music, but it is never music which will lift men's souls in times of need, awaken them to a greater, fuller life. He says Webster's art is meant for small, comfortable salons, where lovely, full-bosom ladies will sing it on concert stages to the accompaniment of the heart. It's polite art for a polite society.
And Webster, in the present, sitting in the freezing cockpit facing his own death, reflects on this. He says out loud, "I'm writing on one of those moonbeams now, Professor, and soon you can play it on a harp." It is a moment of profound, bitter self-awareness. He realizes that his art, while beautiful, was fundamentally detached from the brutal suffering and the messy struggles of the real world.
This realization culminates in what is arguably the most agonizing memory of the entire play, the argument with his mother after one of his concerts. She is frantically pleading with him not to enlist. She uses the exact same logic that Linda used on the Ferris wheel, but imbued with the desperate, visceral emotional weight of a mother trying to save her son's life.
She is just frantic. She says, "You're a composer, an artist, not a soldier. You have no sense of duty to me. At least have that obligation to your art. Edward, your wonderful talents, surely they're more important to the world than anything else you might do. Even if there should be a war, think how more important and necessary you are as an artist than as a soldier."
She argues that there are thousands of able-bodied men who can carry a rifle or fly a plane, but no one else possesses his specific, irreplaceable musical genius. And let's be honest, it is a deeply compelling argument.
It really is.
It's the classic historical defense of the artist in times of global crisis. This idea that art must be preserved at all costs because it represents the highest ideals of human civilization. Why fight a bloody war to save civilization if you're just going to throw its brightest artists into the mud to be killed?
I completely understand her perspective. But Webster flatly rejects it. And his response is essentially the thesis statement of Art Oboler's entire worldview.
Yes.
Webster says to his mother, "We're not at war. We are, Mother. We've been at war ever since that first Japanese walked into Manchuria. We've been at war since Mussolini started to blackjack and castor oil-free men into his way of doing. We've been at war since that first bullet made in Germany hit some workman's wife in Madrid."
He specifically mentions the phrase, "no pasarán," they shall not pass, which was the famous rallying cry of the anti-fascist defenders in Madrid during the Spanish Civil War. His mother dismisses him as being socially conscious, as it's a dirty word, as if being a true artist means existing on a higher plane, floating above the political fray.
Webster's final rebuttal to her is just devastating. He says, "In a world where freedom-loving men need each other's strength, I've been writing charming music. Little tinkling airy bits meant for a world at peace and at ease. Mother, I don't fit into this world. In these times as an artist, I've got no right to exist as an artist. Until that fight is won, there'll be no place for art unrelated to the struggle for a world of international decency."
It is a stunning, definitive declaration.
I really want to wrestle with this for a second because there is an incredible paradox sitting right at the center of this.
Go for it.
What we're listening to, this broadcast of Night Flight, is a piece of art. Art Oboler was an artist who spent his life writing fiction. Yet, he wrote a play arguing that art must essentially take a backseat to physical duty in the face of tyranny. Is Oboler saying that art is practically useless in the face of true evil? Is he saying you have to drop the pen and pick up a rifle, or your life is meaningless?
That's where we get into what you could call a profoundly Chestertonian paradox.
Okay, clarify that for me. What makes a paradox specifically Chestertonian?
Well, G.K. Chesterton often wrote about truths that appear to be standing on their head until you look closer, at which point you realize they're the only things standing right side up.
I love that.
It's the idea of finding the extraordinary within the ordinary, or discovering that the deepest freedom requires the strictest boundaries. In this context, the paradox is that by abandoning his art to do his duty, he achieves the ultimate purpose of art. I don't think Oboler is saying art is useless at all. I think he is demanding that art be grounded in moral reality.
So the Moonbeam music was useless not because it was art, but because it ignored the suffering of the world around it.
Precisely. By putting down his sheet music, walking away from the comfortable salon, and getting into that freezing fighter plane, Webster transforms his actual life into a work of profound, tragic art. He embodies the courage that the Moonbeam music only pretended to have.
He makes his life the music that lifts men's souls.
Yes, and without forcing a heavy theological framework onto the text, we're looking at a deeply Catholic, Chestertonian theme of human fragility and moral responsibility. The play places a tremendous focus on the apex of modern technology at the time: the airplane, the radio, the radar. Mankind has built these miraculous machines to conquer the sky and the distances of the ocean. But in the end, the machine fails. The instrument panel is shattered. The fuel tank runs dry. The radio must be silenced. And when all the technology is stripped away, what is actually left?
Just a man. Just a single human being in the dark.
Just a vulnerable human soul, relying entirely on his own courage and his convictions in a state of absolute, terrifying uncertainty. It's an exploration of the lonely responsibility of the individual. Webster could have stayed home. He could have played the piano while other men died. He actively chose to take on the burden of fighting for international decency, and the cost of that choice is that he must now face the abyss alone.
There's a moment near the end that just breaks my heart. He's talking to the airplane. He says, "I'll sing to you, lady. Remember when they first gave you to me? I was afraid of you. I sang to you then. I'll sing to you now." He is offering comfort to the dying, cold machine that is actively about to take his life.
Because the machine is his only companion in the void. It highlights the profound, crushing loneliness of his sacrifice.
So we have this intense psychological realism. We have this deep, unresolved philosophical debate about art, duty, and fascism. And we have an absolute masterclass in auditory horror and Foley design. Let's pull out from the historical context of the 1940s and bring this back to right now.
Let's do it.
The Chesterton Radio YouTube channel. 620,000 views this month alone. 16.9 million minutes watched. In a media landscape where TikTok algorithms aggressively train our brains to consume content in 15-second bursts, why is this specific message, delivered in this specific slow medium, thriving to such an astonishing degree?
I genuinely believe those numbers are a cultural symptom. They indicate a massive unmet hunger in the modern audience. We have been raised, especially in the last decade, on a relentless diet of fast-paced, algorithmic visual overload. Streaming platforms are fundamentally designed to passively wash over you.
Yeah, that's so true.
You don't have to engage critically. The algorithm just serves you the next visual stimulant, the next explosion, the next punchline, before you have even emotionally processed the last one.
It's media consumption as a purely passive act. You sit on the couch, your brain turns off, and the TV does all the heavy lifting. It shows you the monster. It plays the swelling string section to tell you exactly when to feel sad. You're just a receptacle.
Exactly. But what we're seeing with the resurgence of audio theater, and specifically with a dense, difficult piece like Night Flight, is a powerful desire for slow media.
Slow media, I like that.
People are actively seeking out immersive, long-form listening experiences that actually respect their intelligence. Radio drama requires your brain to work. You have to physically render the graphics in your mind. You have to build the cockpit out of static. You have to visualize the blacked-out sky. You have to imagine the face of the mother begging her son not to go to war.
I bet the thumbnail and the title probably drew a lot of people in initially. Night Flight, drama of darkness, duty, and the edge of control. It sounds thrilling. It taps into very universal primal anxieties. I mean, the fear of flying, aviation anxiety is incredibly common.
Oh, absolutely.
But a good thumbnail only gets the click. A thumbnail doesn't hold an audience for almost 17 million minutes. It's the intimacy that keeps them there. People think they want these algorithmic feeds that do the thinking for them, but these metrics prove we actually have a deep, profound hunger to use our own imaginations.
And beyond imagination, we are starved for genuine, unironic connection. Think about the modern anxieties that bridge the 80-year gap between the 1940s and today. We may not be fighting Zero fighters over the Pacific Ocean, but the fear of losing connection is entirely universal.
That's a huge point.
We are the most hyper-connected society in human history digitally. Yet, we are experiencing an unprecedented epidemic of loneliness and isolation. When Captain Gorham tells Webster, "I am stopping transmission now, the radio goes dead," every modern listener feels that ache in their chest. It is the ultimate ghosting.
Wow, the ultimate ghosting.
It's the manifestation of our deepest fear, that when things get truly dark, the line will go dead, and no one will be there to guide us home.
If you're listening to this right now, really think about that. Sitting with this play, you aren't just watching a tragedy unfold from a comfortable, objective distance. Like you said earlier about the headphones, the difference between being shown a tragedy on a screen and sitting in the dark with someone in their final moments is profound.
You are sitting in the dark with Edward Webster. You are listening to his breathing. You are listening to his memories fragment. You are listening to him desperately try to hold on to his sanity and his dignity as the fuel gauge drops to zero. Arch Oboler proved that human emotion, when recorded purely through voice and sound, does not age.
It really doesn't.
It doesn't get dated like cheap CGI or old special effects in a movie. The sound of a man trying to be brave in the dark is exactly as terrifying and heartbreaking today as it was 80 years ago.
Which is why this isn't just archival preservation. We aren't just looking at this like a museum piece. It is vital, urgent storytelling. It perfectly captures the beautiful, terrifying frailty of being human. We build our incredible technologies, we make our grand plans, we argue about our careers and our art in polite society, but ultimately we are all so incredibly vulnerable to the elements and to the darkness.
And yet there is profound dignity in that vulnerability. Webster doesn't scream. He doesn't curse his fate. He wrestles with his memories. He finds the moral reason why he is there. He sings to his dying plane. He faces the darkness with the courage of his convictions.
It leaves you with such a heavy, lingering thought. Because despite all our modern technology, our GPS, our smartphones, our satellite tracking, our hyperconnectivity, the illusion of absolute safety is just that. It's an illusion.
It is.
We can be surrounded by millions of people, plugged into the entire sum of human knowledge on the internet, but ultimately, every single one of us will eventually have to face our own long, dark flights alone. The engine will fail, the horizon will vanish, the signal will drop. And when that silence falls, what will we have left? We'll be left exactly like Edward Webster, alone in the dark with nothing but our memories to keep us company, hoping that the choices we made, the things we fought for, and the art we created actually mattered.
That is the enduring, unmatched power of the theater of the mind. It forces us to practice empathy, and in doing so, it prepares us for the silence.
It really does. If you want to experience this for yourself, to sit in the dark, put on a pair of headphones, and test your own imagination, I cannot recommend this highly enough. You can find Night Flight and a massive archive of incredible, timeless audio storytelling on the Chesterton Radio YouTube channel. They also run the Open Door live stream, which is just an incredible sanctuary. Day or night, you can tune in and rediscover the immersive art of classic radio drama. It is the perfect antidote to the algorithmic noise that surrounds us.
It's a rare place on the internet designed for you to just listen and imagine.
The storm is still howling outside the windows here in Atchison, Kansas. The Missouri River is completely lost in the blackness tonight, but it feels good to be inside, sharing this deep dive with you. So until next time, keep your ears open and don't be afraid of the dark.